وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning, Michigan. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Okay, good day, everyone. U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken has recently discussed the two-state solution with the new right-wing government of Israel. The belated discussion is bound to yield no solution since the Israeli government plans a de facto annexation of territories in the West Bank. Violence and tensions will worsen between Israel and the Palestinians, and violence leads to more violence. Two questions arise. President Biden supports the two-state solution, but is he making any moves toward that goal? And the Arab states that normalized with Israel, could they have pushed for the two-state solution in return for their normalization? To discuss these and other questions, we have a group of distinguished guests and experts. We have from Michigan Attorney Barbara Harvey, co-founder of Jewish Voice for Peace. We have Dr. Abdalmajid Katranji, who is a political analyst. And from Washington, we have journalist Dan Raviv, who is a former correspondent for CBS News. Later in the program, we will be joined from Berlin, Germany, by Dr. Jamal Nazad, who is a spokesperson for the Palestinian Fatah movement. My first question goes to all our guests, and we'll start with Mr. Dan Raviv. The question is, Mr. Biden supports the two-state solution. Is he making the right moves to accomplish that goal? Why he is not making such moves, and what should be those moves?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I appreciate the question because it is a very tough question right now for those who want peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And the United States says it still favors a two-state solution. Let's note that we're just a few months away from the 30th anniversary of the Oslo Accords that were negotiated between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. And that brought Yasser Arafat back to the West Bank. It also gave the Palestinians some rule over Gaza, only parts of the West Bank, of course. Jewish settlers were not leaving, and Israel has only added more settlements since then. And so, we look back over a 30-year perspective, and we find that the United States government still favors two states. There was 4 years in which Donald Trump, as president, did not care about that at all. He didn't know much about it in person. He did make a visit to Jerusalem and to Bethlehem. He met with both sides, but he clearly took Israel's side. Now we have a more traditional American president, Joe Biden, who is taking the traditional American position that there should be, he says, equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians, that the U.S. favors two states, but he's not really doing much of anything. The explanation from American authorities, including the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who was there this past week, is that the time is not ripe. The leaders on both sides aren't ready to make the necessary concessions. And so all the U.S. wants to do right now is to try to put a lid on the violence so it's not too extreme, it doesn't get worse, it doesn't spark a war. That way the U.S. can think about its bigger strategic interests, which include, being on the side of the Gulf Arab states, confronting Iran, putting Israel in that alliance, and therefore not paying much attention to the Palestinian issue, just a minimum of attention.
Going back to you, Mr. Raviv, the question, of course, is that we, in the absence of a two-state solution, Israel will be eventually turning into a non-Jewish state, a non-democratic state. But in fact, some Israelis have argued that will push Israel into a position where it will become an apartheid state.
Well, you're quite right that some Israelis argue that. And for your listeners, who do, of course, follow the Israeli-Palestinian issues, the confrontation, it's really the competition, of course, for the same land. People may wonder, what is this new Israeli government? And it's pretty clear that to stay in power, Benjamin Netanyahu, he so wanted to be prime minister again, that he would have formed a coalition with anybody. We don't really know where his mind is. Netanyahu has negotiated with the Palestinian Authority. He seemed willing to make compromises over the years, but we don't really know where he stands. And so usually to form a coalition, he'd be in favor of the Jewish settlers in the West Bank. Now, of course, he is absolutely in a coalition with two parties especially that want the Jewish people, to keep the West Bank forever and are minimizing Palestinian rights. And so I just think right now we're at a situation where Israelis who are generally called left-leaning, you could say the more liberal Israeli Jewish people who want to share the land, who think there should be a two-state solution, they're frustrated. Frankly, they lost the election, whereas the Israeli Jews who want to keep the West Bank forever, and I guess they hope the Palestinian Arabs, that the Palestinians would just leave, they got the majority, and they have the majority in the Israeli Knesset. And so, yes, the liberal Israelis are warning that Israel is moving toward an apartheid system, where at least in the West Bank, and obviously Jews and Arabs are not treated the same. Very obviously, there's a favoritism toward the Jews in the West Bank, which Israel has held since 1967, and we're not seeing any change for the better. Within Israel, that's where Israel claims it is the only democracy in the Middle East and has free elections, and Arabs who are Israeli citizens, can hold major positions and teach at universities. But the West Bank is just this shameful example of a land where millions of Arabs have no nationality, no citizenship. And a lot of Israelis do care, but right now a majority of Israelis, based on the election, don't seem to care about that.
Well, Dr. Katranji just joined us, so thank you, Dr. Katranji, for joining. Let me ask you, my first question was, President Biden supports the two-state solution, but he is not making any active moves to accomplish that goal. Why is he not taking any moves, and what should he be doing?
I think the principal reason that he's not making any moves is that he's focused on other parts of the world at this time that he feels is more high priority. For instance, the Russia-Ukraine war is taking up a lot of the oxygen in this space. And the Russian-Ukraine war has really complicated a lot of alliances across the globe because, 85% of countries have not sanctioned Russia. So primarily the countries that have sanctioned Russia are the Europe and the European Union, the United States, and Western democracies by and large, but not all of them. It took Germany a long time to turn around and say, well, Russia, what you're doing in Ukraine is wrong. And what makes that complicated is that you have then other countries that are still dealing and trading with Russia, including Israel, through that process. And so that as Biden is trying to navigate the conversation with Russia and Ukraine, and as to outline Russia's belligerence toward Ukraine and the necessity for us to support Ukraine, he also has to then keep in mind his relationships with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, with India, and then obviously there's always the dynamic with China. So larger issues right now have been taking up all the oxygen. I think that has allowed for an opportunity for Netanyahu to kind of step into that vacuum and use kind of the traditional means of gaining popular support. I'm not convinced all Israelis who voted for Netanyahu are fans of Netanyahu. I think that it's a situation in which they're trying to find something that leads them out of the crisis. And unfortunately, Netanyahu is the one that, at least for his party, continues to offer the other option. And then that creates a huge dynamic because it's very clear Netanyahu is incapable of moving Israel beyond and into the 22nd century because he's holding on to politics that are only relevant from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And we've seen actually what happens to other countries that do that, right? The Middle East in of itself has become more despotic because they had regimes that largely wanted to continue to argue issues from the 40s, 50s, and 60s and not move beyond into the next centuries and move forward. And so this is the concern. Biden himself then is now trapped between trying to show that his commitment and support for Israel, but at the same time, as we know from his experience with the Obama presidency, he's not a fan of Netanyahu. And so you're not going to get the engagement in the Arab or in the Palestinian-Israeli issue that you would get with other leadership. And I think Biden has missed an opportunity with the previous administration in Israel because he was so focused on the Ukraine, so focused on China, and unfortunately, to some degree, very focused on Iran and making some form of agreement and arrangement with Iran, that American leadership in the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was lost.
We will take a quick break. When we come back, we will see what the Palestinians believe. Dr. Jamal Nazal has just joined us from Berlin, Germany. We'll ask him the same question after the break.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600. Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Our noses can sniff out all kinds of things. Good things and bad things. Your nose knows if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So if you want to be sure, swab and test your nose for answers. It's good to know. Find testing information and resources at michigan.gov/COVID test. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are talking about the two-state solution and the increasing violence between the Palestinians and Israel. So now Dr. Jamal Nazal has just joined from Berlin, Germany on the telephone, and he is a spokesman for the Fatah movement. Fatah is the main organization within the Palestinian PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. Mr. Dr. Jamal Nazal, we were talking about the reason why you think President Biden, who supports the two-state solution, isn't making any moves, constructive moves, active moves to help establish a two-state solution or a Palestinian independent state.
Well, either because he doesn't believe in this solution, or because he doesn't think he's able to do this. As far as we all know, the United States are in the position of practicing pressure on Israel. In fact, many believe the United States is the only superpower who can bring Israel to doing what it has to do to fulfill the requirements for peace. That is, withdrawing from the Palestinian territories, allowing the creation of the Palestinian state, and letting the Palestinians live their lives without controlling them, removing the settlers and the settlements who live on stolen land. And we consider the settlers, the Israeli settlers, as part of a brutal, oppressive mechanism actively engaged in a fervent effort focused on maintaining a system of domination over the Palestinians. The settlers are one of the tools of the apartheid regime designed to collectively punish and brutalize Palestinians. Israel is completely responsible for the deaths and killings which take place in the Palestinian territories. Just recently, the Israeli army raided Jenin, killing 10 Palestinian individuals. Most of them were civilians. So why Mr. Biden is not able to pressure Israel into doing what it has to do? I think because he doesn't want to.
But we must also mention that the Palestinian militants attacked a synagogue and killed 7 Israeli citizens. So I have a tough question for you, Dr. Nazal, later on in the program, if you will stay with us for a minute. But let me now go to Attorney Barbara Harvey, if you are willing and ready to answer that question, the same question. I know that you are a civil rights lawyer, but why do you think President Biden is not taking any moves? He says he supports the two-state solution, but he's not making any active moves to achieve that goal.
I think the answer is just what you would expect it to be, which is that Biden's loyalties are to the state of Israel, and I do not perceive in him any commitment to an even-handed approach to this.
Okay, Dr. Katranji, and the question also will go to Mr. Raviv. Bibi Netanyahu thinks his priority is normalization with Saudi Arabia. And he says that such normalization would open the door to maybe an independent Palestinian state later on. What do you think about that argument? Let's start with Dr. Katranji.
The argument is a false paradigm. The relationship for Israel with its neighbors in the Middle East is one track of relationships and dynamics. The interest of Saudi Arabia is purely Saudi Arabian. And the same thing we've seen with the interest with Emirat and its relationship with Morocco, with Sudan and other countries that Israel has now developed diplomatic ties and opened up relationships. But you just cannot ignore, for lack of a better term, the immediate border. It's no different than the United States having its relationship across the globe, but it still has to recognize it's got to pay attention to what goes on in Mexico. It can't be working with Brazil and Argentina and other countries and then says, well, eventually that'll resolve our border issue with Mexico. Benjamin Netanyahu, in so many ways, plays the same Trumpian politics in that let's distract everything to everywhere else and perform and ignore really the issues at home, right? And let's face it, the fact is the Palestinians and the Israelis are intimate to each other. Even from the dynamic of the two-state solution, the fact of the matter is, yes, you got to have two identities, two nationalities, etc. But this is going to be a very intermixed, integrated two states. It's no different than the fact that the southern border of the United States also has states named Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico, and has large Hispanic and Latino and of Mexican origin populations there. It's you got to deal with the community that you have at home. Making deals with Saudi Arabia, making deals with Syria, making deals with Lebanon does not address the fact that you also now have to establish and normalize and develop and cultivate the relationships that you need at home, at your border, with the people that you're going to be with, and Israel's going to be with now and forever, which is the Palestinian. And so the argument that Netanyahu again tries to argue very often heralds old arguments and doesn't look toward the future. Let's not forget that, with the attack on Jenin, the Israeli soldiers were hiding inside a milk truck. And that's unacceptable. A milk truck is a food delivery process. Milk truck is a humanitarian aid process. Similarly, it's absolutely unacceptable to attack anybody at a synagogue, at a church, at a mosque, at a temple. Religious sites are sanctified, and there's no justification for any type of behavior in that normalization. The fact of the matter is, both sides have to recognize that the path forward is not the path of tit for tat, but the path to actually put things aside, let it go, and move forward to work together to build a better future. Netanyahu, being a leader of Israel now, I believe for the fourth or the fifth time, really, has to kind of grab the opportunity by the horns. And similarly with Mahmoud Abbas and other Palestinian leaders, this way that exists currently is just there's going to be no solution to it if we're always looking outside of those territories for someone either to fix the problem or to cultivate relationships in other places to think that will solve the problems at home. You fix the problems at home.
Atef, may I come in on that?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Katranji, I mean, I so welcome your observations, especially when you note that that violence, well, it's almost always a terrible thing. And then the specific methodology of how Israeli commando troops go into the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank, and then there's a firefight, and then 10 people are killed, and there are people wounded, and the very next day, then a Jewish synagogue neighborhood is attacked, and as we know, some some critics of Israel, and including some Arab Americans, look at even the Jerusalem attack by a Palestinian and say, "Oh, that wasn't inside a synagogue," or "Oh, it was in a neighborhood that was captured by Israel in the 1967 war, so it's in occupied Jerusalem." And so people start excusing the violence. But as you say, I mean, Dr. Katranji, I mean, good for you. Where does that take us? It takes us back to what, the 1920s, the 1940s, as you say. How do we look to the future? Now, I just want to say as a reporter that Netanyahu would claim that he's looking toward a future in which Israel has a strong place with other countries. He claims that there's going to be progress toward full relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And of course, that would feel like a really big prize to the Israelis. And I agree. That means ignoring the situation closer to home. So many Israelis, including apparently a majority in the last election, didn't put the Palestinian issue at the top of their priorities. It's not exactly true they don't care about solving the problem, but they think it can't be solved. The Oslo Accords were 30 years ago. Israeli voters say, well, we tried that. We let Yasser Arafat come back. There's a Palestinian Authority. Gaza became more radical. And so the general Israeli attitude is there's just no hope. So let's put our energy instead into confronting Iran, trying to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, having new friends like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco. And so really from an Israeli point of view, things are going well. But yeah, here we are in the United States looking from outside. And we say that's not the future. Things are not going well if you haven't decided, we say this to Israel, what your borders are. Again, Israelis say, well, we don't have any Palestinians to negotiate with and no way of having a deal. And the United States is just trying to keep a lid on things so we don't have an all-out war. And in general, of course, the U.S. takes Israel's side. So that's where we are. And there's going to be more violence along the way because there is, we understand, a lot of frustration.
We're going to take a quick break, after which I'm going to ask Attorney Barbara Harvey to tell us a little about her organization, Jewish Voice for Peace, how it started, what the purpose is, and what her achievements are. After the break.
Were you recently at the emergency room, urgent care, or at your doctor's office being told you need a hand, wrist, or elbow specialist? At the Katranji Hand Center, we offer the latest techniques in hand, wrist, and elbow care. From sports injuries to work injuries to everyday hand, wrist, and elbow problems, the specialists at Katranji Hand Center are here to get you back on track. Call us in Troy today at 248-869-4263 or visit us at KatranjiHandCenter.com to schedule your appointment today.
Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, and seafood dinners. Plus, they offer big trays of your favorite food and so much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab is located at 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills and is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So stop in or call Kashat's today at 248-538-9552. That number again, 248-538-9552. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied. At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
As we continue to face COVID-19, we're now facing flu season. Influenza has the potential to infect millions, putting lives and the healthcare system at risk. Now more than ever, it's essential to protect yourself from influenza by getting the flu vaccine. The flu vaccine is safe and effective and can't give you the flu. To protect yourself and those at highest risk, get your flu vaccine. Learn more at michigan.gov/flu. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing the situation between Israel and the Palestinians, the two-state solution, and the escalating violence between the two parties. Attorney Barbara Harvey, you are co-founder of Jewish Voice for Peace. Tell us briefly a little about your organization.
Yes, thank you. Jewish Voice for Peace was formed, if my memory is, if I can trust my memory, in 2006, and it was created initially as a single small organization in Berkeley, California, and existed as a Berkeley organization for a while, and then became a more serious enterprise, and a staff. Money was raised to hire a national staff. We have a national office. We have chapters across the country. We have quite a few chapters across the country in various cities. Detroit has the Detroit chapter started in 2006. We're dedicated to establishing cordial relationships, a relationship with Palestine and Palestinians as Jews, and to do whatever we can as American Jews to try to set a model for a better future by Israeli Jews who haven't done too good a job of it so far. And we have, in Detroit in particular, one of the two largest Palestinian American populations in the country. And we have a close relationship with the Palestinian community here in Detroit. I'm happy to say a very cordial, warm relationship. And we determined at the outset that the most productive approach would not be to keep focusing on trying to persuade our fellow Jewish Detroiters to agree with us, and instead we set out on establishing strong and trusting relationships with the Palestinian community. That has been very productive and very successful. We have very warm relationships with the Palestinian community in Detroit, and have had now for actually decades. And it has, I think, had an impact on the general community to see that a Jewish organization and the Palestinian community are so warmly engaged with one another and supportive of the problems that Palestinians have had to endure. And so I think it is actually had a positive effect upon the wider Detroit area to see this kind of relationship exist and flower and be as warm as it has been over the years.
What does the general Jewish population in the U.S. think about the idea of a two-state solution?
The Jewish community, I think, is committed to a two-state solution, at least to the Jewish part of it. I don't know that I can say with any confidence that there's a Jewish commitment to an independent Palestinian state. I honestly don't think that there is any such commitment. Sorry to say, except in a much smaller community of Jewish academics who are familiar enough with the situation to understand its importance.
Okay,
so,
go ahead.
Maybe Barbara would agree. Barbara, would you, that because of the Oslo deal, the Oslo Accords 30 years ago, the idea of a two-state solution, suddenly became the thing, and American Jews, who want the Jews of Israel to live peacefully, and I think most American Jews still think that the Jews are a people and should have their own country. The Oslo Accords indicated that there would be a state of Palestine alongside, and then people could come back and live in the correct country, and there'd be peace, and no one would make war. I mean, 30 years ago was like a pipe dream. I mean, in so many ways it evaporated with, I believe, fault on both sides. And the United States, I guess it's obvious, should have kept up the pressure to make the promise of the Oslo Accords a reality. But a question that is now in the region is whether it's too late. Can there still be a two-state solution? Will the U.S. ever be engaged? Will the Israeli and Palestinian leadership ever come back to that idea? Not clear. The two-state solution seems to be in danger, but I don't see an alternative that's going to bring peace to all the peoples who live there.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation. The commitment in this country is to the Israeli Jews, and there is no commitment that I've noticed in this country to the Palestinian community, including the Palestinian community here. I think JVP is the only group of Jews that has a commitment to the Palestinian people within the Jewish community in this country. I don't know of any other commitment, from another group.
Well, obviously, to be fair, there are religious organizations in many cities all across America where proudly Muslims and Jews get together a few times a year. They'll pray together. They'll have community events. I mean, obviously, those are people of goodwill. Does it have an impact on solving the problem, of two peoples living in disputed land, in the Middle East? Well, we as Americans want to believe that everyone can live together, and yet supporting a two-state solution is almost a way of saying, oh, maybe Jews and Arabs cannot live together in historic Palestine, so it should be carved up into two nations. Well, I mean, that's, as I say, is the direction that was chosen, certainly in the Oslo Accords. Just they never got down to the business of making the deal, setting a border, giving the Palestinians a sovereign state, and after a while, the Israeli public just lost patience with the whole thing.
But I think the intriguing thing is that we're ignoring the large fact that Israel in of itself has a large Palestinian population called the Israeli Arab, or the Arab Israeli. So the argument, I think, historically, that they cannot coexist is a false paradigm. The fact of the matter is, Arabs and Jews live together. It's funny that wherever you go in the world, whether it's Paris or Dearborn or, you're always going to have Chicago. There's always going to be an Arab community and oftentimes a Palestinian community living in relative proximity to a Jewish one. I think what needs to move forward is a pressure to say, look, stop calling the Palestinian Authority the Palestinian Authority. If you're going to discuss a state, you got to enable a state. I think one of the fundamental flaws that that I've seen in the whole argument for a two-state solution is this inability or unwillingness by any party to say, listen, you've got the Palestinian Authority. Now we're going to treat you as a state. As it exists currently, it cannot move into that capacity, that direction. It's restricted by policy, by politics, by whatever, to kind of exist as this kind of extension of a concept, of an idea of a state. And that doesn't work. I believe that if you're going to develop a two-state solution, you need to act like there are two states. And that's I think, the impetus. I believe, from my perspective, that the United States, which has long held a pro-Israel position, has often been very confused about how does it engage in a Middle East. Look, we even look at the disaster of the Iraq War. Look at what happened in Afghanistan. There is an incapacity of the United States to facilitate or function beyond a certain level into any state, any policy, even in states that it has taken over and tried to administer and put nearly $1 trillion into it. So I think it's time, for organizations to start saying, look, we have a potential powder keg. It is now currently on fire, and we need to address this. And the power of the United States still rests with the people of the United States, and to really start advocating on a grassroots level that it's great. It's great when you have a Republican start announcing that Ilhan Omar said anti-Semitic things, so we're going to take her off the foreign relation committees because because that would somehow satisfy Benjamin Netanyahu. But the fact of the matter is that's not the issue. That doesn't address the problem. We need to start looking at the Palestinian Authority as a state instrument and enable it then to function as a state. And I think that is something that, it's not the best option. It's not the option we all want. It's not the ideal. But if you're going to start somewhere, you got to start to be able to move forward. And I think oftentimes I've seen the politics ignore that issue entirely and then therefore further paralyze the situation. And the only victims here are ultimately the Palestinians and then the Israeli Jews themselves, because you can never be comfortable if you don't know your neighbor. And the way things are created right now, it's intentionally designed like an apartheid state so that you may never know your neighbor. And certainly that is not within the standard of any Jewish, Muslim, or Arab tradition, because Semites fundamentally believe you have to take care of your neighbor, whether they're Arab Semites or Jewish Semites.
When we come back from a quick break, I will ask Dr. Jamal Nazal in Germany about any Palestinian strategy to deal with the changing environment in terms of Arab countries normalizing with Israel and in terms of Israel moving to the far right. After the break.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New concept products and design. New location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796. When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
What's my ETA?
Your estimated time of arrival is 9:17.
I'm late. I'll have to punch it.
Speeding will save you just 1 minute and 36 seconds. It will also increase your risk of a crash, as well as the odds that you will be stopped and issued an expensive speeding ticket.
Yeah, but...
In 1 year, there were 22,000 speeding-related crashes in Michigan, resulting in 200 deaths.
If I had someone in the car with me, I'd drive slower. But it's just me.
This is not a logical response. Though you have no passenger, surrounding cars contain 27 others, including 5 children and 1 Labrador Retriever.
How do you know all this stuff?
I know everything, Kevin.
Your risk of a crash increases with every mile you drive over the speed limit. So slow down. Speed enforcement is happening now. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing the status of the 2-state solution and the increasing violence between Israel and the Palestinians. Dr. Jamal Nazal in Germany, given that the political environment is changing in terms of Arab countries normalizing with Israel and Israel moving to the far right, are the Palestinians developing a new strategy to deal with these changes?
I would like to answer your question, but first let me have some comments on what Barbara was saying about not only the coexistence, but rather the cooperation that is going on between the Palestinian community inside the United States, especially in Detroit, on the one hand, and the Israeli, or let's say the Jewish community in the United States. So we are familiar to this type of cooperation, coexistence, and mutual work and mutual projects to enlighten the American community as a whole. We welcome this wholeheartedly. But let me take it as a counter-example, a counter-proof to what the far right in Israel claims to be the truth, which is Mr. Netanyahu and his bunch of racist individuals always claim that Palestinians are fighting against the Israeli state because it's a Jewish state. The core of the far-right Israeli ideology is based on the false narrative that Palestinians are fighting for their freedom, but they're fighting against Israelis because they happen to be Jews. That is not true, particularly, and at this moment, I happen to be reading a book called The Chosen Few. The Chosen Few, written by Marcella Botticini and Sylvie Eckstein. And the main idea in this book is about how the Islamic civilization and the Arab history, the Arab civilization, has contributed into forming the fundamental characteristics of the Jewish people as a whole under the influence of the prosperity of the Arab civilization. Jewish communities under the Arab civilization 100 years ago was developed, and they have their freedom, their right to develop their own community. So if the Jewish people ever acquired their characteristic as an educated people, which they definitely are, an educated people who contributed to the science throughout the world, that was because, according to the book The Chosen Few, written by Marcella Botticini, because the Arab civilization allowed them to flourish under the Abbasinian Caliphate, the Umayyadian Caliphate. So that's what we believe in. I believe Arabs and Jews can cooperate and coexist with each other, and there has never been a deadly conflict between Arabs and Jews until Israel started to occupy the land of the Arab countries by force. Ever since, Israel has been killing Palestinian civilians. Israel has expelled the Palestinian people from their country, deprived us as Palestinians from our basic rights, our freedom, our rights to free, not restricted movement inside our country. So the cause of this conflict is because Israel likes itself as a colonial power, focused mainly on exploiting the Palestinian resources, trying, sometimes successfully, to control our lives as Palestinians. Now, what can we do as Palestinians against Israel shifting to the right? Well, Israel has been shifting to the right in the last 3 to 4 decades. Remember this. We've had Isaac Shamir, we've had Ariel Sharon, and for the last 25 years, we had the most hardline Israeli politician called Bibi Netanyahu, either as head of the government or head of the opposition. In either function, he has been trying to be more dangerous than in the other position. Even as a leader of the opposition, Mr. Netanyahu has always agitated and incited against the incumbent prime minister until he was kicked out of office or killed, shot dead by the Israeli extremists, as we saw what happened to Mr. Rabin in 1994. What can we do to prevent Israel from shifting to the right? I don't know that I don't think it's in our hands as Palestinians to tell Israelis what to vote for or against, because Israel deprived us of the right to vote. That's why we think Israel is an apartheid. Israel has built an apartheid system that is focused on brutalizing the lives of Palestinians, and this democracy that you call Israel is a democracy for Jews. If you happen to be a non-Jew, you have no full rights in Israel, and you have no rights at all if you are a Palestinian. As to the normalization between the Arab states...
Also, the other factor is what the Palestinians are doing to deal with the fact that more and more Arab countries are normalizing with Israel without even demanding anything in return. Let me pose that question to Dan Raviv. Do you think, Dan, that the Gulf states and I think Morocco also did the right thing normalizing with Israel without getting a commitment from Israel to create a Palestinian state?
I thought it was really remarkable. I was surprised. I've been in all those countries. I've spoken with people there, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. I frankly didn't think they would do it. And so my analysis is that they feel very threatened by Iran. And so they believe President Donald Trump and Israel's leader Netanyahu that forming an alliance and a bloc would help keep them safe. All they got out of the Israelis at the time was a promise not to officially annex, take possession permanently of all of the West Bank, not to annex the West Bank. That's all they got. Were they right? Were they wrong? Hey, nations, act in their own interests. Saudi Arabia is not willing to go all the way, and Saudi officials still say they'd have to see some movement on the Palestinian issue. Those are the facts. We have to deal with it. It really was a big change just a few years ago.
Dr. Katranji, the same question. Do you think the Gulf states should have insisted on getting something from Israel in return for their normalization?
What I wish the Gulf states would do, and what they're going to do, obviously, is going to be two totally different things. The Gulf states historically have functioned entirely in their own interest. Even when you look at the larger Middle East and the dynamics as it works with Iran, with Turkey, with North Africa. So the fact that the states did not ask for anything in return, did not put any stipulations, is actually no surprise. There's this concept of monolithic behavior in Arab states, and the Arab states are very similar to the United States in the sense that each country, each state has a very unique culture, subculture, dynamic, and demands. So I don't believe Saudi Arabia is going to make any other dramatic changes or asks of Israel other than as it proceeds and moves forward to some of the diplomatic relationships that it's trying to cultivate, as well as the economic relationships that it's doing around the area of the Red Sea development. I don't see them necessarily insisting on anything beyond what we see in the status quo, other than lip service for humanitarian aid and relief. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a reflection of the Gulf population as a whole, but states function as states at times separate from necessarily the demands or the desires of its population. So I wasn't surprised when Bahrain and the Emirates and Morocco made the deals that they made. I think you're going to find more activity when Israel is dealing with Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, because again, Palestinians are part of those communities, and therefore the needs to make sure that we address the needs for the Palestinians is incumbent, because all that region, the Sham region, for lack of a better term, is a very interactive state. All these populations interact with each other on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to conclude our program today with many thanks to Barbara Harvey, attorney and co-founder of Jewish Voice for Peace, to Dr. Abdalmajid Katranji, who is a political analyst, and to journalist Dan Raviv, who is a former correspondent for CBS News. I also extend my thanks to all the way to Berlin, Germany, to Dr. Jamal Nazal, who is a spokesperson for the Fatah Palestinian movement. Thank you all for your contributions, and I will see you again the first Friday next month. Have a good weekend.